My parents were the first to fall ill from the sickness we all know as XoRax. I can vividly recall my father lying on his bed while his muscles spasmed and he choked on his own vomit. I stood at his side, frozen in place, refusing to leave, as I held back sobs, his pupils dilating until his entire eye was like an inky blackness. He tried to speak, turning his head toward me, but opening his mouth only brought forth another torrent of vomit. I remember saying something, but the detail is lost on me now. I just remember staring into his glazed eyes as his shuddering became less pronounced, and he was suddenly very still. I let out a wail and ran into my room, unprepared and unwilling to face the truth. My mother was the first to go, then my older brother who had just turned 17, and finally my father. I had not considered that I would have caught the disease myself, if it were in fact contagious. I just thought myself lucky, though tragically lucky at that. I fell asleep in the corner, huddled with blankets that previously kept my mother warm. Her perfume made the putrid aroma somewhat tolerable, perhaps just enough so I could drip it off. I remember a persistent banging next, a series of muffled inquiries from the opposite side of my locked door. They were shouting for survivors, looking fervently for anyone who was still alive, despite the breakout. I rushed to the door and unlocked it to face what it would come to identify as the day crew. The faces were obscured by large gas masks, fitted with some sort of capsule on either side of their cheeks. Their breathing was slow and monitored. Their voices were nearly impossible to hear over the mechanical wheezing. They were covered from head to toe in black regulation hazmat material, with orange text reading "Day Crew" on their backs. They ordered me out into the main hall, where I managed to catch sight of 14 other children around my age, being told directions and filling into a lineup. Once the entire group had been examined, we began a trek into the streets, which was a vision of chaos and destruction. We had heard the noises of looting and desperation from our homes, but we hadn't ventured off into the outside world for weeks, for fear of catching the sickness ourselves. There were even more day crew that were burning the bodies who had fallen in the streets, trying to purge the earth as they kept their distance from the resulting fumes. We were silently ushered to the back of a large truck that took us south, away from the cities and suburbs, to a dense growth of forest. When the van came screeching halt, the doors swung open to reveal more day crew, who ushered us out to a forest clearing. We were interrogated about our exposure to anyone with XoRax, and if we felt any symptoms like nausea or vertigo, though we all witnessed our family members falling ill and had tried in vain to treat them. We were all perfectly fine in any physical sense. The day crew initially told us that they were perplexed about immunity to sickness, as anyone who came in contact with it was sure to fall ill just hours later. So it was a shock to see us. Some of us had been living in a nightmare for weeks on end. As they administered more tests and asked more questions, however, we were more told that the immunity was tied with our hormone cell, and the disease was using to compose the immune system, and since we were all too young to have properly developed it, the disease was unable to make us fall ill. We were all told that the day crew wanted to study us, that we would live under the cover of the forest in quarantine. They'd hope to extract a cure from our group that would be used to heal the work and rid of the XoRax disease. They tried their best to sound positive in light of the situation, but it was obvious that they were doubtful of their efforts and that there were no guarantee for any of their tests to follow through. So they kept the mood optimistic and promised that we would save countless lives with our efforts. They built a secluded village in the woods, providing us each with makeshift house carved into tree trunks around the area. It was into a simple tree house that had a single bed on the far end and table in the middle. We were told that the first thing in the morning we were going to have our blood taken, so we weren't allowed to eat anything until then. I was fine with that. I hadn't been hungry for days. The image of my mother, father, and brother crowded my thoughts instead. I didn't get much sleep. The forest was tripping with crickets, and the muffled bickering of the night crew kept me up into the early hours. When we were woken to the next day and filled into a single lineup to have blood drawn. While the meals were prepared for us, we were told that we would have to receive a vaccination that would prevent us from going through puberty to preserve hormone that might be a cure. It was never elaborated on the time what we would never be able to grow up or have children, but it was unlikely to live beyond the first few hours of infection, never mind the next few years. So our adulthood was seen as an unnecessary sacrifice. This continued for weeks as we continued to receive vaccination and assured that a cure would soon arise, but times were getting desperate. I took to listening in on muffled conversations of the night crew during the night. It became easier to make out what they were saying over time as they sat beneath my room window next to a crackling fire. I discovered that our encampment was only one of many in the surrounding area, that they decided that the XoRax originally came from the sea to the west. Passed around horror stories of people that lived by the shore that were hit the worst and had gone completely pale, and that they began to sprout growths off their elbows, hips, and their toes. They were told to keep constantly hydrated, or else their skin would begin to flake and peel. The pupils had dilated and their entire eye was colored black. After this bit, I thought it was my father sitting on the couch and writhing in pain. There was food in the mountains, one assured another, and they were gathering it in droves, perhaps to keep it from spoiling. Another spoke up, revealing that they had managed to find an expecting woman who weren't supposed to have XoRax, and that they were being kept in the mountains to birth their new young away from the sickness. The topic came back to their present situation as they began to discuss the encampment, that our results were promising. They weren't being worked on as fast enough. Their accountants claimed that their fingers pointed, but they at least settled on keeping the move positive. That something would come along eventually, that we just needed some more time. Discussion drifted back of the horror stories of the West Coast and clearly sparked sick interest in the group, as they talked of the corpses that had been found along the waters and drifted ashore, each with deep black eyes. I rolled over in my bed, unable to listen to any more of those stories without images of my family, staring upwards at the ceiling, praying that we would manage to find a cure soon, and that I would have to hear about the people in the West anymore. It had finally been nearly a month of testing, and when something went wrong. A few short hours after our latest vaccination, several kids began complaining that of a distorted vision. They could see trailing lights in the air, making their way across the plains. While their faces were covered with their masks, a sense of worry that played across their faces. We were told that they're just visual hallucinations and that they would subside in a few hours. When I woke the next day and glimpsed outside, I too could see the trailing lights drifting through the air. If there had been anyone to discuss the lights any further, I thought it was clear that everyone could see them. As we lined up to have our blood drawn, one of the day crew became terribly ill and began to vomit through his gas mask. In a frenzied panic, we were already back to our homes as they led the sick member away from everyone in the chalk-like substance to the woods. We were told to come out with organize ourselves in the line of decontamination. After covering everyone with a chocolate substance, they began to scrub away at it with some foul-smelling liquid that they were assured we were safe to deal with once more. This excessive procedure became part of our daily regimen, and now we started calling them the scrubs, rather than the official titles. We were delusioned, and it was obvious that they were as well. The visual hallucinations began to worsen even though we had stopped taking vaccinations long ago. Some kids began to befriend imaginary creatures in the air, speaking in the trails of light. I was horrified that I might start losing my sanity as well. I didn't want to eavesdrop on the discussion over the fire that night, which had gradually worsened with each passing week, with a trailing desperation in their voice. The night crew began to exchange information about the other areas. The food in the mountains had been contaminated. The rivers and rumors began to surface that the births had resulted in defects, which each child began well over a healthy birth weight and their eyes far apart. They would likely succumb to the disease and perish as well. It was decided. The cure had been tested on the XoRax, written patients hadn't shown any signs of preventing the sickness. Rather, it had simply shown the progress of the sickness, so that it claims it lives in days rather than hours. While this is a bit of good news, the focus on how little was accomplished over such a large span of time, and how anyone with the sickness shouldn't be kept from stringing along, rather destroyed so they couldn't contaminate anyone else. There was a coldness in their voice. I rolled over to my bed and watched the lights play across my vision, dancing across my eyes until I fell asleep. The scrubs were gone the next day, leaving us behind as their failed experiment. The other children seemed to be unaware of this and decided to continue befriending imaginary creatures. In this depression, I sulked off to bed, only to suffer a violent burst of spasms and shivering process. I drifted in and out of sleep that night, having only one reassuring nightmare after another. When I awoke, I heard something pass through my doorway, something that couldn't possibly be there. Rolling over, I reluctantly looked up in the air to watch a trailing ball of light float around my house before descending toward my bed. "Hello, Link. Wake up. The great Deku Tree has summoned you."